Today is Wednesday, August 20th, 2014. My name is Jason Higgins, and I'm an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. I'm in Stillwater at the OSU Library to interview Lieutenant Colonel Bill Schwertfeger to discuss his experiences during the Vietnam War as well as his time at OSU. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History Project. Mr. Schwertfeger, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome, Jason.
Let's begin with when and where you were born.
Born in Enid, Oklahoma on the 22nd of September, 1945.
And what was it like growing up in Enid?
Well, in actuality, I was raised on a farm in Renfro, Oklahoma, which is about 7 miles south of the Kansas line. Moved from the farm at age 8 to Medford and stayed there. Went to high school in Medford. First grade school finished up in St. Mary's Catholic School.
Was your father a farmer?
Yes, he was. He was a farmer and a machinist, quite well at his machinist job. Farming, paid the bills, but mainly his machine work, and he's very good at what he did.
So did you work on the farm throughout school?
No. I learned at an early age that farming was not in this young man's character.
I understand.
Even though during the summers, during high school, I worked for a farmer. And that's just the means of getting cash to be able to do things you need to do.
Absolutely. Do you have siblings?
I have a brother. He's 5 years older, born in 1940. And a sister, which was born in 1949. So,
Tell me about school. Did you have any favorite subjects, mentors?
well, it all really started mentor-wise at age 5 with my interest in flying, and was based upon my uncle had an old J3 Yellow Piper Cub. And out at the farm, he would fly out and land in the field right there by the house. And he might bring a newspaper or things like this. And on the 5th birthday, so that would have been 1950, that'd be 1952, so that's the 7th birthday. My uncle landed and he says, "Bill," and my uncle's name is also Bill, he says, "Oklahoma has one of the newest MiG aces from the Korean War, and his name is Robbie Reisner." And I told Uncle Bill, I says, I want to be just like he. I want to be a pilot. And as we progress along in the story, you'll hear how I interface my life with Robbie Reisner. We'll meet again, and it's a very interesting story. I don't know whether you want that now or we want to kind of chronologically go through things. But from the age of 5, interest in flying started. In school, math, engineering, physics really lit my fire. Had a real strong English teacher. Her name was Miss Manila. In fact, when I went to country school, she was one of my first grade teachers. She ended up being my high school English teacher. She was the English teacher for my wife's dad, which is now 93. I'm 68, so you can tell she's been in the profession for quite some time. And my English was good. I didn't necessarily have all the names of how I wrote, but yet I wrote quite well, and she was pleased. We'll talk about in college how she really put a feather in her hat when I told her I got a certain grade.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your path to OSU.
Again, engineering was my goal. In fact, aeronautical engineering was what I set out to do. And you know what it's like being in the auditorium
Mm-hmm.
with a meet and greet in the engineering department, and you're told to look left and look right, and those two guys aren't going to be there at the end of probably the year, let alone graduation. Okay. And I looked at those poor suckers and I said, well, I feel sorry for you guys. But I was very positive. I knew what I wanted to do. And while entering into Oklahoma State, the ROTC program was mandatory in 1963 for all years. I mean, you had to take it for the first 2 years, your freshman and sophomore year, and then you could opt for the remaining. And it was a very formidable year for my life in that it truly took and brought structure, dedication, line of sight of where you wanted to go, what you wanted to accomplish, and how to meet those tasks and goals. And so those first 2 years were very, very informative and constructive in my life. And there was a slight change from the junior year in high school when I was a radical, not a radical, but kind of wild. And then I got to the senior year and the light went on and says, do you want to be drafted or would you like to become an officer? So when I went to school, I knew what I had to do. The threat of being drafted wasn't there as much as it was the fact that I knew where I wanted to be. I wanted to fly. I wanted to be like Robbie Reisman.
Now, whenever you said radical, you didn't mean politically radical.
No. I'm just I had wild hair for part of my junior year.
Were you a bachelor during your college years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't marry until 1969.
Okay. Interesting. So that fulfilled part of your draft requirements.
Yes.
Without backing up too far, I wondered if you could talk to today's audience a little bit about the educational atmosphere during the Cold War, growing up in the Kennedy era.
Well, you know, 50s through 53, I'm really pretty young, 5 to 8 years old. So the Korean War was on and dying down. Out on the farm, we had ATV, and it had 3 channels. And so you may have seen something, but again, as a kid, I really didn't pay any attention to that. When I arrived here in 1963, things started to become more apparent. And of course, I can remember that dreadful November day, walking from the Sigma Chi house, which I pledged, by Theta Pond, and hearing that President Kennedy had been shot. And it took the campus. It really affected the campus. I mean, everybody, regardless of where they were politically, hit him hard because he had a vision, a direction, and he asked that we, the youth, be a part of that dream. You know, ask not what you can do for, or I can do for you, but what can you do for your country. Very powerful. So it really knocked us down.
During your time at OSU, you graduated in '67.
Yes.
Certainly, the nation was becoming more politically radical.
Yes.
Was there a strong left environment
on
campus?
My daughter asked me that. She went to KU, and I says, no, I don't remember any really events like took place at Kent or any of that on this campus. Of course, Oklahoma State is a land-grant school which has a strong military. Oklahomans by nature are very supportive of their military, very supportive of their nation. They have a strong stock of work ethic, things that doesn't really bounce left or right, and specifically here in Stillwater, is what I saw. Never did I see anything. Of course, I was really focused in on the ROTC program, and when I went from the sophomore year into the junior years when I made my commitment. I found that, again, academics is critical, and if you don't study for aeronautical engineering 401, which is structures and things, or the double E course that went into some great lengths of things, that if you don't study, you're going to end up flunking a couple of courses. And I went and flunked 2 courses in my junior year. And the professor of aerospace science told me, he says, Bill, we're not going to be able to keep you in the program because your grades went down. And boy, I saw my future change dramatically. And I says, what if I go to summer school and I get a 3.0 during summer school? Will you bring me back or allow me to stay in the program? He says, generally I would say no, but I understand your desires. Your work ethic is great. It's just that academically you were taking on something that maybe was too much for you. So I says, okay, I'm going to change my degree from aeronautical engineering to physical sciences. All the math and the physics and everything, everything transferred. I didn't lose any credits. And of course, then the workload was a lot easier in the physical sciences area as it was to aeronautical engineering. He says, you do that, and you come out with the 3.0 in summer school, and we'll keep you. And I did. I worked my behind off during that summer. As I then progressed in the ROTC program, I was very active in a society called the Arnold Air Society. It's a group of professional cadets within, which is nationwide, very active again in the Air Force pilot regime, even though a lot of them were not pilots by any means. But it really, again, honed where I was going and what I wanted to try to do. The PES told me, it says, though, that you're not going to go and do any extracurricular activities within your studies. You're just going to do studies. You can stand up here on the hill that's back behind Bennett Hall is where we used to march. Now it's a sports center or something like that, or a practice field. You can stand up here on the hill and look like you're one of the elite cadre, but you're really just a pogue sitting over there out of the way. I don't want you to do anything special. I says, yes, sir. I'm good at that. I mean, I can handle it.
So was camaraderie already becoming a building block during the formative years?
Yeah, definitely so. I developed friendships and bonds with guys that have carried through for almost 50 years. It was a great building block, and I owe it all to Oklahoma State for my education and the future that I therefore had, and the ROTC program for giving me the opportunity to serve my great nation for 21 years.
Absolutely. So after graduation, can you kind of take us through the training process of becoming a pilot?
Yeah. While at Stillwater, the senior year, we went out to the airstrip, and we had a pilot program where we learned to fly 172. And that was our first real stick time. I'd flown with my uncle. I knew that I was going to be like Robbie Dreisner. In 1965, so it's the second year of my just getting ready. In fact, I was in the junior in September, just after my birthday, when Robbie was shot down over North Vietnam. He was a squad commander, a great leader. Killed 8 MiGs during the Korean War. That's when I first got my focus on wanting to be a pilot, wanted to be like Robbie. And here he was shot down. And I says, I need to get out and in the war so that I can get Robbie released. 1965. Leave here leave here from Stillwater in 1967 May. In September, I'm at Advanced Air Force Base checking out to be one of the newest pilots in the United States Air Force. Graduated in September of '68. Went through some training processes. I was assigned to the F-4 Phantom tube. At that time, we were not putting brand new lieutenants in the front seat of the F-4, so we put brand new lieutenant pilots in the back seat of the F-4. We didn't really have a good navigator program at the time. Was that my most exciting time in the world? No. Every pilot wants to be the one in front, the one in charge. But I learned a lot about the F-4. In fact, I could and have demonstrated on more times than you can count that I could handle and know what each person was job supposed to be, whether I'm in the front seat or the back seat, instructing or being the pilot. '69 is when I got married. Been dating my wife since 1963 here in Stillwater. She grew up on a farm not far from mine. We'd known each other since we were about this high when my mom bought a horse that she loved dearly. And she goes, "You really stole my horse." And I said, "Oh, it's my horse now." And so we banter about that at times. But anyway, in 1969, we were married. In March and in August, I'm off to war.
How did you guys prepare for your deployment to Vietnam?
Well, it really was just a series of training in the F-4 to get combat ready. And that was held at George Air Force Base in California.
How did you prepare mentally and socially with your wife and family?
That is a toughie because, honey, I'm going to go to war. Mm-hmm. And she inwardly did not like that thought of her husband going to war and the possibility of not coming home because guys were going down. I mean, guys have been going down since Ev Alvarez in August of 1964. Mm-hmm. And during the 65 through 67 time frame, a lot of guys got shot down. Mm-hmm. A lot of them didn't come home. A lot of them are prisoners of war. A lot of them died. So it was tough on her. But she knew my goal and my desires, and I think it gave her confidence that, in fact, I could be the best. And I was the best, and therefore I would survive. When I left in August of '69 to go to Ubon, Thailand, she went back home to Caldwell and lived right next door to her parents' house. The closeness of the community was great. Small town America again. Your husband's off to war. We knew him, we know you, we're with you 100%. I spent a full combat tour in the F-4 flying out of Ubon, Thailand. So WOLFAC, that's a elite organization within the wing that handpicked select pilots to do this very demanding and high threat combat role of seeking out and finding specific targets that our slow mover FACs could not get into, either due to the threat, their speed was so slow that in fact the probability of them getting shot in the high threat area was greater. So therefore we brought in the fast movers, and that was our job. We seeked out, targeted, and then directed destruction of the targets.
Was that during your first deployment?
That's during my first tour, yeah.
Can you talk about how many flights per week on average you would you were
Well, I
conducting?
flew 100 and maybe 20 missions during from August to June.
So roughly every 3 days.
Well, there was days that we were flying every day, and then we might take a week off and go to Bangkok to relax. Or I came back and met my wife in Hawaii for a week. But generally, we're flying about 5 times a day. I mean, 5 times a week. My missions, as a fast fact, were anywhere from 3 to 6 hours long. So I'm in the combat environment a heck of a lot of time. The Golden BB was always out there. It's just whether you were good enough to avoid that BB.
Right. What were some of the dangers in the field for the F-4 pilots?
Well, out of that first combat tour, I was hit 2-3 times. One was a 37 millimeter that hit the wing of the F-4. I was in the back seat, and the pilot and I determined that we've lost all hydraulic there. The airplane was still flyable, and that's one of the most important things that you can ever stress, whether it's driving a car, flying an airplane, is fly your machine. Don't go, oh my God, we've been hit, and then let the airplane crash because you didn't do your job. So we focused on flying the airplane, getting away from the guy that just shot us, and pointing to the west to a safe area, and hopefully an airfield that we can land at.
Did your training become instinctive during situations like that?
It has to be, Jason, because if you don't, if you have to go through, oh my God, we got a failure, what do I do? Break out the book and look through it to find out. I mean, it's great. It's all in here, and over time, it becomes second nature. So that's boom, boom, boom.
Right.
The problem solved. Now you may, after you get out of the high threat area, get pointed in a safe direction. Everything's under control. Then bring out the little book and make sure that we did all the steps.
Right.
Okay. Never leave anything to chance. But the most important thing is get out of the threat area. Fly the airplane. Did it get my attention? Yeah. And I wear a bracelet here for Neil Bynum. Neil was a 1966 Oklahoma State graduate. He graduated in December. We were both in the Arnold Air Society. He went to Vance in January of '67. He went 6 months front, probably about February or so of '67. I went in September. He went to F-4 training. I'm 6 months behind him. We go from the F-4s to Ubon, Thailand. He's in front of me 6 months. He's flying Wolfpack just as I'm entering the Wolfpack mission when he was shot down. Took a direct hit in the cockpit of the F-4. The airplane went into the ground, body's not recovered. I wear Neil Bynum's bracelet today, as I've worn every day since he's gone in, as a reminder that life is fragile. Combat is everlasting, and the possibility of death and non-survival is always ever present. And so when I talk about heroes later on, guys like Neil Bynum are the true heroes because they paid the ultimate price. They made the supreme sacrifice in the shedding of their blood and the giving of their lives so that you and I can sit here free. These kids out on this campus can walk carefree because of the blood he shed and all those 58,000 and some guys shed during that war.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It seems that these would be high combat situations, perhaps 5 times a week. How did you cope with that the psychological toll of combat so often, and then the loss of friends.
Well, it's something that you have to deal with. You have to compartmentalize. You have to stick things that you don't like, that you can't stomach. The fear. You have to lock that dang thing up and don't let it out. Because if you let that fester, then you'll start questioning, will I be shot down today? And if you get into that mindset, just like football, you think we can beat Texas this time? Oh my God, they're really strong. I don't know. Oh, and you start to beat yourself up and question yourself. And guess what? Texas just rolls over you. It's imperative that you stay focused, stay concentrated. Now, when you come back from the flight and you are soaking wet, the humidity is always 100%, it seems like, and the temperature is at least 100. And so you're really just physically, mentally drained when you land. And sometimes they almost got to lift you out of the cockpit when you're so physically spent. But you may go to the O Club and have a few with the bros, talk about that mission, other missions, what did they experience, what did they find, what kind of threat did they see, so that tomorrow we can take that information that we all talked about and apply it to the next day's mission. The wolf found a big gun site over here, and it was still there when he left. We couldn't get ordnance on it. Well, guess what? That guy's going to be the first guy that I visit when I take off the first go in the morning.
Right.
And I've got ordnance set up to take him out. And it's very fulfilling to know that we made them die for their country rather than we dying for ours. And that's what war and combat's all about. Does the military enjoy war? Do we enjoy combat? Do we enjoy dropping bombs and watching things blow up and killing people? No. That's not who we are. That's not who we, the American people are. However, if you push us and you deny us or you threaten us, we will use all force available to make you die for your country rather than we die for ours. So that's kind of an offshoot, but I think it's important that your viewers understand is that today, as it was in World War II, as it was in World War I, it doesn't make any difference. The military hates war. But it is our job to be prepared should we be asked by our president to serve in very difficult and trying circumstances. And we have to be prepared to carry that out to the ultimate goal of even sacrificing our lives.
Absolutely.
We sign that check, and it's an open-ended check when we put on the cloth of the United States Air Force or the military, that I will serve and protect and to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And should I be asked, I will give my life so that you might remain free. That's an open and blank check. And I signed it in my blood when I did it. And that's what every one of these guys you see on campus, they're prepared to do that. They're learning the process to do that in the ROTC programs. But when you see a guy in the uniform, he made that commitment. In fact, I'd be thankful that he did, because you're not having to do it. Okay?
Absolutely.
A little bit off the subject, but I think it really gets to the kind of the heart and meat of what military is, what combat's about. And if you want to proceed on more about the end of that tour and come back to the States, we can, however you want to chronologically go.
Right. Well, you bring up an interesting question. for me to ask, and that is, civilians who have an experience where it's really hard for us to grasp the concept of war. And after coming back from your first tour, how did you relate to civilians? How did you adjust back to stateside?
Well, it was a cakewalk. I mean, I just came back home. Different than the guys on the ground. Those of us in the air came back to clean sheets, showers, air conditioned hooches. The Army guy, the Marine, lived in the mud. And when his buddy here turns into a bucket of goo, and he looks and goes, "Oh my God, that's my best friend." It has a toll on those guys. And they saw that for a year. They had a harder time adjusting. Because when they come back, one, our nation was totally against the military, and they were totally against the war. I come back in '70 for the first time. Boy, I mean, guys were spit on if they had their uniform on. Not necessarily officers, not us, but the poor guy on the street that's wearing his uniform, and people are coming up and cheering, "Baby killer," all this. And of course, the news was full of that hype of playing it into the communists' hand of portraying your American fighting man as a baby killer. Were innocent civilians killed? Most definitely. Were there cases when a certain squad or a couple of guys did some very dastardly and inhumane things? Yes. In the fog of war, when hot metal's in the air, you don't really look at who you're shooting. You're just shooting anything and everything that's in front of you, because it's your life that lives on. And what you may find is, as the press comes up, there's women and children there. Did that guy know that? In the fog of war? No, all he knew is that there was a bunch of people in front of him that were shooting at him.
Right. Did you experience any anti-war sentiment upon
I did
first?
Did not, because again, I went back to George Air Force Base to upgrade from the back seat to the front seat, and then turned around and went right back 9 months later. So when I finished my upgrade training, I went back home for a couple of weeks with my wife. Everybody was so thankful and everything. Small town America, just like small towns in Oklahoma. Really wasn't a big hotbed of anti-war.
Right.
We understand as Oklahomans how important our military is. We believe in a hard day's work. We believe in honesty and integrity, that our handshake and our word is our bond. It's something that Oklahomans have. And it makes life easier for us in the military because we're appreciated. Yeah, there's going to be hotbeds of protest. And maybe in the 70s, after I left in '67, maybe there was stuff going on campus. I don't know.
Well, it certainly wasn't Berkeley, right?
Yeah. There's hot spots that, and the more liberal areas you go, the more you're going to see that.
I wondered if you could talk about your decision to was it a volunteer
Yes.
to do a second deployment?
Yes.
How did you come to that decision?
Well, it goes back to my friend, Robbie Reisner. In 1968, President Johnson did a bombing halt from the DMZ north into North Vietnam. So our guys, Robbie, shot down in September of 1967. And here it is, 68, he's going to sit there. I'm now there in 69 through 70. He's still sitting there. And I say, I've got to get back and win this war. And I'm not the only guy. There were hundreds and thousands. Army guys have got chevrons all the way up their sleeves of how many times they went back. So it was a no-brainer for me. My wife, even though she was not happy that I was going to do that, she again knew that my determination and my desire and my feeling of duty, honor, and country. So she accepted the fact. And when I redeployed back, 9 months after getting here, she went back home to Caldwell, Kansas, to live there by her folks. Small town, 1,200 people. Take care of her.
So she had a good support network there. Huh?
Oh, yeah. It's, it'd be different if you're in a town of 3 million people and you're just another bump on a log, not knowing anybody. That'd be terrible. But if you're at home, surrounded by your people, it's easier to deal with.
How did you guys maintain communication while you were deployed?
It was the standard letter writing, and then we got to where we were using the little disc tapes, and we would mail those back. And I'd talk about, hey, honey, here's what I did on a mission today. And sometimes I would even tape my combat mission, and then send her the tape. Here's what I did today. I wouldn't necessarily put the tape where I was really doing some heavy stuff, but to give her a feel for what it's like, so she knew that what she was seeing on TV was not necessarily what was happening in the theater. But I went right back to the same unit that I was the first time. In fact, I walked back in and there were still guys there in the squadron that I knew from when I left. Okay. So that was a very nice, formal reintroduction to my squadron mates. Went right back into the Wolfpack organization, which again, this elite handpicked group of aviators.
Were the missions fairly similar to your first deployment?
Oh, exactly. The North Vietnamese had been surging more, and especially I got back in April of 71. And towards the first part of 72, as we were working along the DMZ area, and there were incursions by the North, we would strike those targets. And of course, then we'd go into North Vietnam and strike at the heart of their supply areas and things like that. We weren't attacking North Vietnam because it was there. It was because they attacked us, and therefore, whether we were fired upon or whatever it happened to be, we would then protective reaction strike.
Was that part of Operation Linebacker?
Linebacker's going to come on here in just a little bit.
Okay.
Prior to that, no, it's still no bombing north of the DMZ, other than this protective thing. Now, in 1970, while I was home on leave, the State Department and the Department of Defense and the Air Force and the Army and the Marines put on a major insert into North Vietnam, just outside of Hanoi, at a place called Son-Tay. And at this camp called Son-Tay, they had pictures of prisoners of war. And so the intent was to go in, kind of like what they did at Osama bin Laden's compound, to relate to today's world. But they had a small type task force that went in to Son-Tay, sat down, nobody there. A failure of current intelligence. something today that we have with our overhead eyes and ears didn't exist. What we had back then was a remote drone that would take pictures. And in actuality, this site was found by the fact that two SR-71s were coming in to do high altitude reconnaissance. And as they approached the border, the lead SR-71 says, "My camera systems are all good too, you can go back to base." As he turned, his cameras were still on, and as they reviewed that film, they saw off on the side this POW camp. And then there was a big consternation of, okay, we see them, we know they're there, can we get them? And it took almost 9 months, if I'm not mistaken, before they finally got the go to go in. And when they got there, nobody was there. That was 5-8 miles away. There's guys in this camp that are watching this fire show. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going up in the sky by the enemy, and things are happening, and they're hearing stuff, and they're going, what the heck is going on over there? Tied with that raid in 1970 and the death of Ho Chi Minh in 1970, the North Vietnamese determined that all these little camps that were strewn all around the Hanoi area could be susceptible to further attack. So they drew them all in to a place called Wallow. The Hanoi Hill is what we called it. A big French prison that was built by the French for the Vietnamese during the French occupation of Indochina. And with Ho Chi Minh's death and this bringing of guys together, the treatments that your American fighting man had to deal with, brutal torture. I mean, brutal torture. Starvations, beatings, malnutrition, no medical care, on and on. Your American fighting man, Robbie Reiser, finally had a slight reprieve in the type of treatment. It turned from brutal and nonstop solitary confinements and things to a more of a coexistence. They were moved into units, rooms with larger groups of guys in rather than one or two. They kept the senior ranking officers, of which Robbie was one of those, away from, but within the main camp area, but outside of contact. This brought back at least a little bit of comfort to those guys. As I go into the 1971 and then 72, the North Vietnamese are really building up along the DMZ. It's obvious. I mean, I'm flying over there and I'm seeing it, and we're reporting back to 7th Air Force in Saigon. Something's going to happen. And on the 16th of February 1972, I was tasked, along with a large strike force, to go in and strike North Vietnamese heavy artillery pieces that were firing across the DMZ at our fire bases in the south of the DMZ. In other words, they were prepping the target area for mass invasion. And on this day, the 16th of February, I had 3 pictures of SAM sites, surface-to-air missile sites, built by the Russians, manned in some cases by the Russians, and handed over more to the North Vietnamese, but obviously instructed, manned, maintained by the Russian forces. Intel says, nope, those photos are bad photos. They're not current. And I says, okay, well, I'm going to take them. And I brought out this flag that I always carried when I went to a briefing. And it was a BS flag. In other words, if you were not telling me the straight story, I would wave the flag and say, you're full of it. This is what's going on. This is what we saw yesterday. You're not current. And he was supposed to be the intel guy, telling us what we can expect. So anyway, I'm with the first launch in the morning before sunrise. My guys out of the 433rd Tank Fighter Squadron, the squadron that I was associated with and flew with when I wasn't flying Wolf, was the Laser Guided Bomb Squadron. And I'd been in that squadron for both combat tours. I knew the lasers and their capabilities and their bombs inside and out, was highly proficient in both front seat, back seat operations. Very capable in how to employ and survive using the LGPs. So we go up there and we start taking out some of these heavy artillery sites when looks about like your hand, an 85 millimeter gun sight. There's a fire can radar, which is their guidance radar here in the center of my palm. And around the fingers are 85 millimeter guns. These are radar guided now at my aircraft and my buddies as they're attempting to drop bombs. So I decide that this is a threat. We need to neutralize that threat before we can continue on our job. And we do that very effectively. I tell the guys, hit the fire can first, and I put a smoke right on top of it so that wouldn't be any doubt in their mind what I'm talking about. And the wind's out of the northwest, so I says, okay, we're going to start at the south end of the guns, and we're going to work up so that no smoke is ever in our line of sight. Okay. No dust, no debris. Boy, the fire show that took place when these ammunitions and guns start blowing up with a 2,000 pounder right down the barrel is impressive. Start to get some activity from SAM sites. We have radar homing and warning gear in our airplane that would tell us whether it was a gun or an airborne AI or whether it was a SAM or a whatever type of threat, early warning. So we knew what was around. Obviously, I said I had 3 pictures of the sites. We struck a couple of other major command structure things because, again, they were a threat to what we were doing. And then I told the guys that I'm going to go on up the river and look at these SAM sites. My fellow Wolfpack coming in behind me to relieve me as I went to the tank. And I says, I got enough gas to check this out, and I'll let you know what's up there. So as I'm going up the river, and I'm doing about 550, 600 miles an hour, I'm hauling. And we're constantly moving the aircraft laterally and vertically to deny any gun-trained activity on our airplane. Mm-hmm. And I come up on the first SAM site, and it's just like the picture. I mean, exactly like the picture, with no missiles on. And that's what the picture showed, no missiles on. And it was perfect. Nobody there. That guy's empty. Mm-hmm. As I roll up and continue up the river to where the next SAM site is, guess what I see? I see 2 great big giant fireballs coming at my aircraft. And I said, that site's occupied. And what this is a telephone pole that's going to accelerate out to Mach 3. And being a highly professional guy that knows his enemy better than the enemy knows himself, I knew that those 2 missiles were not a threat to my airplane. Mm-hmm. They might have been to the guys behind me. But the rocket boosters were still on. That's that big giant orange flame that's jumping towards me. And so until those rocket boosters drop off and exposes a guidance antenna, those missiles can't guide. Mm-hmm. So right now they're ballistic, not a threat to me. And I'm now inside his cone of operation that he can't do anything to me anyway. Mm-hmm. So I circle over the top of this guy and I says, we're going to strike this site. Now, I still have a picture of another site just up to the north and west of us, or north and east of us. I didn't see it, but it wasn't launching. Were we getting indications of launches on our gear? Sure. I mean, this guy was trying to get the guys to the south of me, which I'd called up here to bomb him, to stop. And so, boy, they start doing SAM evasive maneuvers, which slows down the process of me getting ordnance on top of this guy. Unbeknownst to me, and to the west of my position, a very narrow area in North Vietnam. You can see the beach and you can see the high course, you can see the border. It's very narrow. But off to the west of me is an SA-2F site. What that means to you, Jason, and your audience is, it means it's an optically guided missile. It has the standard guidance radar, but rather than using it for ranging and acquisition and guidance, they'll use the camera. And then they'll take a gun radar from completely different location. And they'll use that for ranging, data linking that to the fire can or the fanson radar, so that they now have ranging and they have position. And then all they have to do is hit the command det button. And that's what they did. Did I know that missile was there? SAM site there? No. Did the guys in 7th Air Force know? The intelligence guys? Yes, they did. In fact, that very SAM site, they were listening to the Russians and the North Vietnamese that were manning that site. Watch this. We're going to blow this F-4 out of the sky. And he doesn't know we're here. They were listening to it. And they knew that site was there. It was too secret for us to know. Okay? And we've seen that in numerous other occasions. Whether it was in Bosnia, when we lost an airplane because an SA-6 that wasn't supposed to be there was there. Shot down an F-16, shot down an F-117 later. The next day, just to give you a little bit of history, still too secret, we lost another F-4 and another 105. That's 6 guys. 5 of us ended up being prisoners of war. 1 of them died. Because we didn't get the information to the guys that needed. The guys on the ground, the air crews, the flyers. And so if you have any word or influence to those that are thinking about SIR, surveillance and radar imagery and things like that, and intelligence, is don't keep it locked up in your little secret box, because somebody's life depends upon that information. Let us sort out whether it's important or not. Don't say you don't need to know. Because we killed a guy and we sent 5 of us to Hanoi just because of that. Okay, I'm going to stop, let you see what you need to do, and or we can continue
Well, it seems
the
that
story.
you're addressing a major problem in the war in Vietnam. That's a bureaucratic process, and that seems to always be an issue. Before we get into the event in which you were shot down, I have a couple of questions before I forget. Did you ever experience any racial animosity during the Vietnam War?
No. One of my best friends, fellow Wolfpack, and was a black guy, Gene Jackson, one of my best friends. We went to training in the F-4 at George. Went to Ubon together. We're in the same squadron, flew the same missions. No, did not take place. Now, I can't say that in the enlisted rank.
But in your experience.
But I can't say that for the Army or the Marines. totally different environment. And the reason I say that's a totally different environment is each and every pilot is a college graduate, highly dedicated, professional, military background. Okay? Totally different than the guy that was drafted. I don't want to be here. But he is there.
You bring up another interesting point, and that's that obviously college educated, has a degree where you were working class, you come from a working class
Right.
background.
Right.
Would you describe your fellow airmen as working class backgrounds too?
Well,
Would you know?
We had rich guys, so rich that, they didn't need to be there.
Right.
But they wanted to be there. They wanted to serve. And then we had country folks, dirt farmers, pig farmers, cattle farmers, ranchers. We had guys from the cities, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, New York City, you name it, all different backgrounds. But again, we're all, I say highly educated, at least we graduated from college with a bachelor's degree.
Right.
We all chose to enter the military.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, it means we're all volunteer force. And then we go through a really highly concentrated and military-oriented training so that when we come out that pipeline at the end, we're the best that there are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Did you also serve with any non-American personnel?
We were on a Thai base, even though we didn't fly with the Thais. The Thais did their own flying. Later in my career, did excuse me, some stuff with the Spanish. But generally speaking, our unit was an all Air Force, all U.S. Now, there were some units that had exchange guys in, whether it be a Navy guy or a Aussie or a Brit, just that wasn't flying with me.
Okay. And do you have military history in your family?
Zero.
Zero. But you always had that interest in flying.
Yeah. I'm the first college educated, first military.
Congratulations
What?
with that first generation. That's a big step. All right. Well, one more question before we get into that to the event on February 16th.
Yes.
All right. And that is, did you ever have any superstitions or luck charms or anything of that nature that you carried with you?
No. A lot of guys say that I'll take this with me each time because it's been good luck. I did it on pure faith. I always wore a gold chain with a cross on it, that I wore that since I was a pup going to Catholic school.
Did you witness or experience drug or alcohol issues?
I want to say no. Again, based upon our group as pilots, drugs I don't think was ever an issue. With the enlisted, and especially in country, I won't say it's prevalent. It's probably not any different than any city or town in the States at the time. Okay, it's just that it got the press because the press wanted to beat down a very liberal press at the time, still kind of today, but they wanted to show that your American fighting man is a drug addict, baby killer, drunk, and that was a bad portrayal. It's a bad rap, and it's mainly because of what the press did. Okay, drinking. We pilots have a tendency to like to socialize after we get down from a mission. Do we drink? Yes. Do we drink to excesses? No. Oh, yeah. I mean, let me qualify that. There are times that, yes, we did get silly, really silly, but we had fun. And we were ready to fly 100% the next day. So I want to say basically no to both cases, even though there are certain
exceptions.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Could you take us through the events of February 16th?
Okay. On the 16th, as we were talking earlier, my aircraft was shot down by this optically guided SA-2F. My instincts immediately went stick, throttle, get the hell out of there, because I'd just been hit. Unfortunately, the back end of my airplane is no longer there. That's what was blown off. So I don't really have engines that are working, and I don't really have a tail and a stabilizer that allows me to fly. In the past, when the F-4 was really struck hard like that and lost hydraulics, if you jammed the stick full forward, you could lock the slab, the tail end of the airplane, in a position, and then you could use power to porpoise the airplane out, and differentially use power to kind of laterally move to go to the direction you want. Did I get that out of a checklist? No. I mean, I just did it.
Right.
All right. And I made a call, Mayday. Well, none of that stuff worked. We're in a flat spin, and what that is it's just pivoting around its own axis. And again, as I stressed there when I was talking about the area at the DMZ is very narrow. I mean, it's like the beach is right here. And if I could only make it to the beach, we could eject and get out and maybe get picked up. And then as it swung around, you'd see the high karst. Well, okay, let's try to go to the high karst. Not a preferred place to jump out, because that karst, very rugged terrain, very sharp rock, could do some damage to your body if you landed in it, but it's better than being on the ground with rice paddy. The unfortunate thing is, it just kept going beach karst, beach karst, beach karst. And finally my backseater says, I think we need to get out. I said, okay. I told him to go first. And we have a command selector in the F4 that, if rotated, it'll allow the backseater to punch both of us out. And in all my flying, I told him never to rotate that, leave it straight up and down, until I specifically tell you. In other words, I'm so busy trying to fly the airplane that I can't punch us both out. Punch us both out. This was not the case. I told him, you go. After he went, I went. As I'm coming down the chute, a lot of small arms. We'd just been kind of beating up the folks around the area there, so they weren't really happy, and I don't blame them for that. He even picked up some higher caliber rounds, and as I took out my radio that we carried, I made another Mayday call, and as I'm looking down, my F4 is right underneath me on fire, burning. And I knew that if I got close to that fireball, it would suck me in and I would perish in that fireball. So I let go of my radio. It's still tethered on a nylon cord, but it's hanging down by my feet now. And I reach up and do what we call a 4-line cut. Cut the line so that you can now steer your parachute. And I steered it away from the fireball. And I land right in the middle of 2 dikes and a rice paddy. And I land right on the top of the dikes. And I've got 2 squads of North Vietnamese militia coming up those dikes. This is not good. And I always had flown, and did that day, with 4 hand grenades. I had 2 in my gun belt and 2 on my chest. And loaded rounds, obviously, in my pistol that would definitely take somebody out if they got close to me. And the intent was, in Laos at the time where 90% of our soldiers were flown, the Laotian and the Pathet Lao and the North Vietnamese were not taking prisoners. They basically cut your head off with a machete. And so my intent was, I am going to make them die for their country, even on the ground, as many of us as I can, before they take my life. And if I can survive and get a standoff and get rescued, great. But that's the intent of all that armament that I had with me. Unfortunately, these guys are coming up, and the guy on my left, he's got a 9mm pistol, and he's going bloop, bloop, and the water is just dancing at my feet. Now, he could have raised that pistol up and put it around my chest or wherever, but he was shooting at my feet. And as I start to undo my risers, I asked this friend of mine, he's a damn good friend of mine, and you probably know him. His name's Duke, John Wayne. Very good friend of mine. And I says, Duke, what do you think about pulling the pins on these grenades and trying to get as many of these guys as we can and die? Or just raise my hands and surrender? And the Duke says, you know, Bill, I think discretion is a better part of valor here. Therefore, I would raise your hands and surrender. And I says, Duke, I think you're right. And that's what I did. Now, was I talking to John Wayne? No.
Right.
But yet I was. Okay. And as they come up, of course, they take everything off, tie you up, they start to march me off. And we come up on this ravine. This time from shoot down, capture, to walking maybe a quarter of a mile before we got to this ravine. I felt very confident. I'd been shot down, but I was still alive. I was under enemy control, not farmers and people with pitchforks and things like that. So I figured my survival rate was good. When we come up on that ravine, the guy behind me grabs me and stops me. And then he cycles around through his AK-47. And it's pointing right in my back. And that's the only instant that I turned to my Maker, God the Almighty Father, and I says, have mercy on my soul, forgive me my sins, for I shall die here at this spot. I was prepared to die for my country. And the guy turned me and made me walk parallel to the ditch. And I went from dying to thank you, Lord, for I shall survive. And I did. They took us to a military compound. My backseater, well, he come down. He landed on the other side of the tree line in the dikes. I didn't see him. When he came down in his chute, the farmer had one of these old Wunderblust Plymouth shotguns. And of course, he pointed up at Ralph and goes boom, and didn't hit him, thank God. And so when Ralph come down and started to undo his riser, he just turned it into a giant sledgehammer and whacked Ralph across the head. Thankfully, he still had it on his helmet. It knocked him out, but it did give him brain concussion or worse. So we're now both of us together, me and my backseater. We're still tied up. This day, the 16th of February, is Ash Wednesday for Catholics, the beginning of the Lenten season. It's also the beginning of Tet for the North Vietnamese. And so they brought in one of their very delicious meals, which was fish heads and rice and banana leaves and everything wrapped up and I told Ralph, I says, that is a steak. And I want you to eat every bit of that damn steak. Because we don't know if we're ever going to get anything again. Mm-hmm. And we have to have something. We had the early go in the morning. That was a 5:30 lunch. And now the sun's set and we're sitting there at 7 o'clock at night. We ain't had squat. Mm-hmm. And I says, eat that. And he says, boy. And I says, just close your mind. It's the best Philly steak that you ever had. Because he's from Philadelphia. And we ate it. And they transported us within the next 2 days to Hanoi. We pulled up in front of Wallow, the prison camp, the Hanoi Hilton. I'd never seen this place. But when they got us out, took the blindfolds off, there's this giant, big green door, double swinging doors that you drive big implements in and out of, and a little side door. And I told Ralph, we're at the Hilton. They put us into some solitary areas, asked us a bunch of questions, didn't say squat. Wake us up, interrogate, on and on, hands off. And the thing that was taking place that I did not know until later was that on the 16th of February 1972, or a little bit after that, a couple days, Nixon was arriving in China for the first meeting with the Chinese. And so the North Vietnamese, wanted to highlight the newest Yankee air pirates, the newest war criminals. That's what they called us. They didn't abide by the Geneva Conventions, the whole 9 yards, so they wanted to downplay Nixon's event to the Chinese. So they stuck us on TV. That was the first time my wife knew, other than a Mayday call, that I was from missing in action to alive and a prisoner. Same thing with RGs. And same thing with the other 3 guys that were captured the following day. I wasn't proud of being on TV, but I tried to stand up as proud as I could. I was not a humble like they wanted us to be, bowing and things like that. I stood up erect and says, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm in good health. Period. Done. So that eased her comfort, and eased Ralph's wife's comfort, to know at least we're there. Okay, I don't know whether you want to go into, because I could, this story is longer than you want to do.
So, you mentioned solitary confinement. Yes. Can you talk about the organization of the prisoners of war in the camps?
Yes, I can. Being in solitary confinement, we were in rooms about the size of a bathroom. It's basically 9 feet long, maybe 4 foot, 5 foot wide. You take 3 steps, turn around, take 3 steps. That's your exercise. They had the concrete slabs with built-in stocks. The old guys had their legs in those stocks. Those stocks were made by the French for the Vietnamese. So you take a 6'2" Caucasian white male, or any male, and try to stick those stocks around your ankles. The only way they got them to lock was to jump on them, to force them to lock. Same thing with the manacles that the old guys had to wear. They were so tight that they physically had to stomp on them to get it to latch so they could lock it. And they left those on for these old guys. So I'm going to talk about old guys more because I think it's important that your audience understands what your American fighting man had to deal with. It start to cut off the blood flow to the wrist and to the ankles. And what you'd find is that your skin would burst, erupt around that. And they leave those on for such lengths of time that the skin would start to grow back over those manacles. And then they'd come in and rip off your manacles. You can imagine doing that several times over a year, 2 year, 3 year period. You'll see guys today, your American fighting man, the American heroes, have their own bracelets and their scar bracelets on both wrists and both ankles. Permanent scars because of the treatment. And while they were in those manacles, you know, they didn't get food for squat, they didn't get water for squat, they had to basically take care of their personal needs in a can. Hygiene was non-existent. I mean, it's just a very terrible environment. I mentioned earlier, 1970, Ho Chi Minh's death. The raid on Sante moved to the wall of the building. Conditions changed drastically. Larger groups of guys together. The seniors, ranking officers were always held off to the side. But from 1964, when Alvarez was shot down, to the first U.S. guy showed up in 1965, they learned to communicate by
Morse code.
a tap code. And the tap code is, if you can visualize, Jason, a quadratic with A, B, C, D, and E across the top, and then JFK all the way down to Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So you take A, column 1, row 1, would be 1, 1. B would be come over to row 2, column 1, or column 2, row 1 still. And that's how they communicated. And you could do that. Sound travels through these 8 or 5 foot or 3 foot thick concrete walls quite well. And it's just like in the days of World War II and the Stalags, when you put the cup up to the wall and you listen. These guys are talking, communicate, be strong, don't give anything but name, rank, date, serial number. Continue to resist until the point of physical or mental loss of capabilities. Okay? That was important because now the guy solitary here and the guy 5 solitary rooms down were communicating. Hey, I was just tortured last night for this. Okay, gosh. Okay, I was tortured for this. So they started getting a feel for what the North Vietnamese was asking, what they're trying to do. Later on, as more guys, not 1, 2, 3, but now 10, 15, 20, spread out still in separate deals, they're communicating, all of them. You're not alone in this. Just because you were tortured yesterday don't mean that you can't stand up and be ready for tomorrow. Because now we had some continuity, some strength, that bond, that unity. That's why they called Wallow Camp Unity, because it did form that bond, the unity that allowed these guys, your American fighting men, to survive under very brutal conditions. And when I talk about torture, I'm talking about brutal torture. They would lay a guy out because he was an SRO, a senior ranking officer, and they wanted to break the lines of communications that was going on. So they would lay him flat and take fan belts off of a big diesel truck and start whipping this guy one on each side, and fillet his body from the nape of his neck to the bottom of his feet. Can you imagine that pain? Can you imagine what your body is dealing with as your skin is physically removed? Compare it to when Christ was scourged at the pillar. Very brutal, very brutal. They use a technique called the ropes, and it is a means that doesn't show very much physical abuse, but it does cause very definite physical pain. And what it is, if I can kind of stand up here for your camera. Just so you can see here, if it's going to be in tight. If my hands or their hands are behind their back in shackles, what they'll do is bring your arms up like this, and then they run a nylon rope through your biceps and cinched it. And when I say cinch it, it means that they're putting their feet against your shoulders and bringing your elbows to touch. It's physically, normally impossible for those elbows to touch, but they will. And what it does is it'll bring your hands now back up almost to your neck as your elbows are touching. And it'll dislocate basically shoulders. Because of blood supply to your shoulders, your elbows, your hands. They run that rope over your shoulders. And for us country boys, they have clevises, U-bolts, that they'll stick your ankles in and then run about a 25-pound bar across the top of, that's laying on top of your ankles now. They'll run that nylon rope under that deal and then stand on your shoulders and out cinch you up to where you're looking where the sun don't shine. Tie you off, leave you there. What it's done is, like I said, cut off blood supply to every spot in your body. The pain is horrific. And they'll start asking questions. And in my case, they knew, and it's a kind of a separate story on how they knew, that I knew about lasers. But it took place even on the 20th or 22nd of February when I was at the zoo, one of the camps. They were always quizzing me all the time about laser-guided bombs, 433rd Squadron. And I just go, I don't know, I'm a brand new guy. This was my first sortie. I just got country. They asked me to go up there and fly around, look around, and I did, and I got where I wasn't supposed to be, and I ended up getting shot down by doing a squat. And they go, oh no. In the back row were Caucasian males with blue epaulets on. My interpretation, Russians. Okay. And they were wanting to glean information about this LGBs. And so they finally break out Aviation Week, lay it in front of me and say, see here's a laser-guided bomb. Why are you asking me if you got the book? I didn't know anything. And this little lieutenant was the guy who quizzed me. He sat right across like you are. And his vein in his forehead is sticking out about a foot because he wanted to reach across and just choke me. He wanted to hang me on one of those hooks where they bound guys up and drug them up and hung them. And then after a while drop them and then find another hook at a different angle and drop it to land. He wanted to do that, but it was hands off. Well, on the 10th of May, I'm going to give you a lot of dates, and these dates are ingrained in my mind. It's the 10th of May, 1972. We've gone from being in solitary confinement to now a room of maybe 15 to 20 guys. They come in and say, put on long clothes. And they put plastic ties on my hands behind my back. I say to myself and my fellow POWs there that this is not going to be your standard quiz that I've been going through. They march me out. We go through that big green door, the little door on the side, get in the Jeep and go to another camp. And we walk in to this room, and there's this table smaller than this, lower than this. And I'm standing there, and there's this little guy. We call him the Bug. He's got great big old buggy eyes. He always wears sunglasses, and he has a pith helmet on. And he's sitting there at this table, and there's a stool lower than that I'm supposed to sit on. They have to be higher than us. And he says, "Tell me about the LGBs." This before I sit down. And I go, "I've told you guys for the last 4 months, I do not know anything about laser-guided bombs." Well, an AK-47 rifle butt hits me in the head. And I bounce off this wall, and the wall is protruding, rugged, jagged rock up to about 6 foot tall. And of course, I bang into that with my head and my shoulders, and it kind of gets my attention. He asked me again. Still don't know. Another rifle, but they throw me down and put me in these routines. Now, how did they know all this time that I was in the 433rd Tech Fire Squad and that I knew about laser-guided bombs? Well, they had a copy of my flying records from Ubon, Thailand. So whether the little guy that cleans the squadron at night got it, made a copy of it, photographed it, whatever, I don't have any idea. But it was there. And it showed this was my second combat tour. I've flown over 350 missions. I got over 1,000 hours of combat time in the F4. And yes, I know laser-guided bombs inside and out. Mm-hmm. And I still say, I don't know squat. Well, pretty soon the pain gets to the point, and I'd mentioned take torture to the point of loss of mental or physical capabilities. And that was a part rule that the old guys finally established, a slight change in the code of conduct that we developed within the prison system. Because if you lost your mental or physical capabilities, you would start to do things that you don't want to do, say things. And it might be detrimental to our country, your fellow prisoner of war, whatever it happens to be. So my intent was, as long as I can control this, Jason, I can control the situation. The pain, not important, but I need to get out of this situation. So I kind of like this, standing with my head, I look over to the Bug and I tell him, maybe I know something about the LGBs. And the instant before that, when he asked me again, do I know anything? And I says, no. This big guy, he's a 6'2" Gomer, North Vietnamese, very unusual, very strong, very stout, light switch communist. Feed him, boy, just feed you like you're supposed to. Torture you, he'll torture you to the nth degree, just like a light switch. Well, when Bug asked me that question, and I go, I don't, Bug looked at him, and he picked up the fan belts. And I knew that fan belts and in the ropes was going to be a spot that where I could not probably return from without saying something that I didn't want to say. So I says, okay, I know something. He leaves me in this situation for a while and asks me again. I says, yes, I think maybe I do. So they start taking the ropes off. And what happens is like when you're hit your crazy bone and you feel that surge of pain, or your arm goes from asleep to waking it up. Well, multiply that times 1,000 and rotate that through your entire body, because you've cut off blood supply to every spot of your body. Now blood's rushing in, the nerves are now starting to wake back up and, oh my God, where have we been, and that what's going on, and it's as painful as where we were at. So we go back and we do about 2 weeks of nonstop questions about LGBs. And I feed them so much sand, off the wall, things that laser biter gums or laser guidance systems could never do. But they were writing it down because they needed to know. And when Bug had told them to start undoing the ropes on me, he smiled down at me with that bug-eating face of his and just smiled. And in my heart of my hearts, I knew he was saying, I have yet beat another one of those Yankee air pirates into submission. He was telling me, he was grinning. And in the heart of my hearts, I was looking right back into his eyes and saying, smiling, I beat you, Bug, for I will fill your ass full of sand. Oh, it warmed my heart. Oh, it warmed my heart. Well, we went through this series of quizzes, and it's not nonstop 24 hours, but it's, you may quiz for 3 hours, take a 15-minute break, and then right back at it. You may get to go back to your solitary confinement, maybe get your eyes closed back up. I mean, it's just a constant give in. But I said the rosary. Again, I don't want to play religion a lot, but it's something that comforted me, allowed me, as I've talked about in several instances. So I'd say the rosary, and when they're asking questions, I'd be in my own little world, and finally they'd slap me about the head and shoulders and says, you need to answer this. And I go, okay. So I'd feed them some non-capacity thing. And they wrote for 2 weeks straight. When they finally got done, they says, okay, you must sign this. And I knew I wasn't supposed to sign a document. I really wasn't supposed to have been in there in the first place, but there was options of go back through and do that again or fill them full of sand. So I took the option of filling full of sand. So when I signed my name, there's a T and an F in the middle, and I just transposed the T and an F, so that if anybody saw my signature and knew my real name, they would know that I signed that in distress, because it wasn't the way it's supposed to be. They couldn't tell the difference, but somebody that was looking would know. And the reason this happened on the 10th of May, a very significant day, and we're going to have one of these guys here, Roger Locker, that shot down 3 MiGs. He's going to be here today. He's a K-State grad. Shot down that day. The Navy had shot down 6 MiGs. Roger's other wingman shot down 3 more MiGs. So we shot down, Roger shot down 2 that day. 3 is 5 plus the 6 over here, 10 MiGs in one day. And my 433rd Laser Guided Bomb Squadron had flown into Hanoi and dropped the Paul Dummer Bridge, a bridge that had never been destroyed during the entire war. They targeted the pylons with 2,000 pounders, and they just dropped that thing like hot butter. And so the North Vietnamese were interested in, how do we defend against this? What can we do? Right. And that's why this whole thing took place. The other guy that's going to be here today is Chuck DeVellevue. He's the leading MiG ace with 6 MiG kills. He's going to be over at the ROTC unit at 1500 as we're cooking hamburgers for these kids. So there's a lot of things that went on the 10th of May. And now it all ties together that I get the rest of the story about what happens.
You bring up an interesting, quite relevant concern. Throughout the process of the Iraq War, you heard a lot about torture and torture tactics and the reliability of information under distress. What are your insights to that? How reliable is physical torture as opposed to perhaps psychological torture?
Well, the North Vietnamese did both. The Iraqis, I'm sure, did the same thing. In both cases, their models of physical torture were based upon, I think, personally, the Korean War, which was basically a ground invasion. And I'm not downplaying the guys at all, because they served their country in some very difficult circumstances, but they weren't highly professional, college educated, And so torture and the lack of communications, like we had established, allowed torture to be a very prominent means of getting information. Now they ask, the North Vietnamese and the Iraqis, I guess, ask military questions. But, it was worthless. I mean, we weren't going to say anything that was going to compromise a mission or anything. And by the time we got into the system and got to the point where they were interrogating and torturing us, we've been out of the loop too long, so it doesn't make any difference. Most of their purposes was propaganda. They wanted to see your American fighting man bowing his head and saying, "Oh, the American people, we are sorry. We have been bombing these people." And they wanted to show that image. And some great guys did some great things to defeat this. And I'll give you another example. If you want to move your camera up just a little bit.
Sure.
They bring out Commander Dick Stratton. He's a Navy guy. And as Dick comes out, his head is down. And the cameras of all the foreign press were there. And he was supposed to read this statement. And rather than reading the statement, Dick Stratton does like this. And then he turns 90 and he does like this. And it continues all around. It just keeps doing that. And the press goes, "Whoa, you guys have brainwashed this guy." It's kind of like Manchurian Candidate. Okay. Oh, did he get beaten and tortured for his display? Because it made him look like a fool. It made the North Vietnamese look like a fool.
Right.
In another instance, Admiral Jeremiah Denton, Senator Denton, just passed away this year. Was buried at Arlington. Blinked with his eyelids in Morse code. Torture. He was reading a statement that was prepared. He had been brutally tortured to make that statement. But he was telling the American people, "I have been tortured to make this statement." When the North Vietnamese found out, because again, what happens, the press goes, "Oh, Denton just blinked that you guys are tortured." Oh, he was brutally tortured, even worse than beaten for his actions. Paul Galani was on Time magazine. At Time was going to shoot a photo op, and he was brought out to do this. And so he does like this with his hands, giving the finger with his hand in his crotch. And when Time magazine gets back to the States, they see that, and oh, we can't do that, so they airbrush out his finger. Well, it got back that Paul Galani was giving the finger to the North Vietnamese. And boy, again, he was brutally tortured. This is your American fighting back, and however he can, blinking his eyes, bowing, playing like a Manchurian Candidate brainwashed guy. True American heroes. Now you talk about psychological torture. it was paramount. I mean, it existed. And I'll give you an example of how it existed. There's 12 of us in separate stalls, 6 on each side. We've been in there in solitary confinement. We're told that if we stand up and try to make contact with the guy across the way from us, we'll be beaten. That's why guys were stuck in stocks on the side to prevent that. And you'd hear the guy, the turnkey, wiggling his keys when he opened the main door coming into your cell area. And everybody started just, going crazy because, oh God, please don't let him open my door. I have been tortured and tortured and tortured, and I cannot take it again. Especially tonight, I can't. I'm just too weak. And as he stuck that key in that guy's door, it was just like, oh my God, please. And you'd hear him wiggle the key, and the guy was sweating profusely. He was breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
Then he pulled the key out. And the guy goes, oh my God, thank you for sparing me of this cross. Then he went down across the way, and you heard him wiggle on that key. And then he goes, oh, please, dear God, don't let it be Herb Stockman, whoever. For he has been tortured as brutally as I. And they'd take that guy out, and then you'd hear the screams of being tortured. Here he goes back through it again, beating himself up. Why, Lord, did you take him? I am stronger than he is. But yet I asked you to pass that cross. And now I am guilty of that guy's torture. That's psychological warfare to the nth degree. It's really getting into your head. And you can tell by the swelling of my eyes that I'm feeling that very thoughts that's going on there. And it was effective. Now, constantly throughout the time, Hannah's blabbering her crap about warmongers and things like that. You hear that 24/7. And then, God forbid, but we did, we'd hear a fellow prisoner of war making statements against the war. How great the North Vietnamese are. There were 2 specific guys that aided and abetted the enemy. They helped them. They were given treatment that was far better than what the rest of the guys were. And they passed on information that they got about what was going on within the leadership of things. Those 2 guys are traitors. And they should have been tried as traitors when we got home. And in fact, when we did get home, they tried to have them charges brought up against them. But Operation Homecoming was such a big, fuzzy, warm thing that the press, the PR folks, didn't want to draw down. So they shoved them to the side. And they were basically forced to retire on their own or get out of the service without being court-martialed. It's a sad fate, but it happened.
After your homecoming, what was most difficult about adjusting back to American society coming from a prisoner of war?
Well, let me talk about the flight back and landing at Clark, and I kind of give you a clue, and then I'll expound on it back home. The guys have been jerked around for years, the old guys. You're going home. They get dressed up. Go back. Again, part of a psychological warfare. So when finally, after the B-52s had come north and bombed Hanoi and Haiphong and the military structure to the total decimation in there, the North Vietnamese broke. And they says, we can't fight. You've destroyed us. So when we finally come out, first in, first out. Ev Alvarez, August 1964. You're going to be on the first airplane out of here. And you're going to be at the front of the guys walking the line. And then those needing emergency or medical requirements. Those are the first guys come out. They come out on the 16th of February. President's Day. Lincoln's birthday. Okay. A very important day. When that airplane landed at Clark Air Base, the hospital folks were prepared to receive frail guys, malnourished, weak. They just didn't really know what to expect. Well, from the 27th of January, that's when the peace accords were signed in 1973, until February 16th. February 12th was when they come out, my fault. The North Vietnamese had really put on a lot of soybean, meal cakes, more potatoes, more high protein salmon and fish and things like that, sardines. Anything to start getting some weight back on, guys. It's the first time guys actually probably saw doctors for wounds. We had a guy that had been there for 5 years, still had a wound that was still open and weeping and seeping. It had never been treated for 5 years. We had guys that had broken limbs. You take a look at John McCain. The only reason he got in all that plaster Paris casting was because his dad was the admiral in charge of the war out of Higgins. That's the only reason that he got medical treatment, because they wanted to use that as propaganda. And John wouldn't allow it. He wouldn't ask for any better treatment or anything. He was one of the troops. Anyway, when we were landed at Clark, and the people were there to greet us, and Admiral Denton was the first senior ranking guy to step off the airplane. And I'll just kind of paraphrase his statement, but he stands proudly and turns to the Admiral and the General there meeting him. And he says, "It has been our honor to serve this great nation of ours. And we are thankful to our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, for allowing us to serve this great nation under very difficult and trying circumstances, and to bring us home as proud Americans with honor." He then bent down, kissed the ramp, and said, "God bless America." Wow. What a rally. When the guys get to the hospital, they eat, I don't know how many thousands of eggs, pounds of steaks, boxes of ice cream. They ate them out of house and home because they were expecting them to not be able to stomach any of this. Guys have been spending 5, 7 years, these old guys, dreaming about the day that they got home, they were going to eat. or they were going to do this. And they did. They ate them out of house and home. They had to fly in airplanes full of ice cream and steak and eggs just to keep feeding as the guys proceeded to come out. I come out on the 28th of March. Last airplane come out on the 29th of March in 1973. The biggest heartbreak that I had, and each and every one of us had, is there were guys that didn't come home. There were guys that we knew that were in the system that we had established, that we knew were alive, but yet didn't come out. Were they still alive? We didn't know. Were they someplace held as the white pearl to be used as a bargaining chip later? Don't know. We knew that some guys did come out after the war, after the release date. So that was the tough thing. And each and every one of us dealt with that because those guys had lost friends. I mean, died in captivity due to torture, malnutrition. And it took a while to get their bodies out. And we had a recovery process that did do that. And it was a very solemn, just what you see at Dover when the coffins come home. Those men were given the most supreme and utmost respect. For again, they had paid the ultimate price in the shedding of their blood and the giving of their lives for their country. Once I got back home, I was ready to get back to flying, as were a lot of the guys. Because basically what had happened, whether it's 16 February 72 or 4 August 1964, we died. Our lives stopped. And it was in hold. We dreamt, we knew what we wanted to do, we concentrated on it. We built our lives based upon what was going to happen on our release dates when we got back home. When guys did it, I mean, we had guys that were building mansions in their head, nail by nail, board by board, electrical diagram by electrical diagram, all the way up. And then they go, I really want to change something. So they tore the house down, board by board, nail by brick, all the way back down. And then rebuild it the way they wanted. When they come home, a lot of those guys built that house. And they built it board by board, nail by nail, because they knew exactly where every nail was going to be, where every outlet was going to be, what kind of brick they're going to use, because they had built it in their mind. And that kept their sanity, kept their mind alive. And there's all kinds of other techniques the guys use to keep with us, learning and teaching Russian, Chinese, French, Japanese, Spanish. You know, we had guys were teaching calculus and derivatives, and I mean, it's amazing what guys can do to keep their minds busy, because they had time on their hands, didn't they?
Absolutely.
And if you let that thing up here go to waste, as soon as it does, you're dead. Period. Okay.
That's very interesting. Did you ever experience nightmares or any other psychological problems afterwards?
You know, not until the 8th of January, 1998. Because I had locked that up. Put it far back in the box and just left it there. And it stayed there until the night my son was shot and killed by his best friend watching television. And the kid, just like you and I are sitting here. My son's sitting on the sofa. Here's an end table. This kid walks over to the end table. There's a gun sitting there. Picks it up, chambers it around, points it directly at my son, right at his shoulder here, squeezes the trigger, and kills him.
Oh, God.
And the kid says, I didn't know the gun was loaded. I didn't trust putting the safety on. He violated every code of gun safety there is. Assume a gun is loaded until proven otherwise. Don't have a loaded gun in the house in the first place. He had the 5 same rounds that had been in there from when he had been shooting, so he always loads it the same way. Don't point it at anything you don't plan on killing. Never squeeze the trigger until you're ready to kill. Every code he violated. And I tried my damnedest. And this is a good friend. It's a small town, 1,200 people. We all know each other. I tried my damnedest to have that young man charged with involuntary manslaughter. And it was ruled as an accident and just dropped. And I was flying for American Airlines at the time, and I was at Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, at midnight, when my wife calls me and says, oh my God, Chad's been shot. And in disbelief, I go, what do you mean shot? He's been shot. He's no longer with us. And from that instant, that box opened up that I had locked away. You talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. It was reopened from something in 72, 73, and this is 98. I had that thing all just taken care of, locked up. And it jumped out of there like a damn bull out of a bull riding gate. I mean, it just knocked me down, stomped on me, and damn near crushed me. And I had to fight back, and I had to be strong for my family now because they were totally unbelievably beaten down. And so you start locking things back up again because you got to be strong for the family. And so what's happened over the years is it's leaks out. And I'm still doing PTSD sessions with the psych guys. I take medicine to try to control depression and things like that. Was I ever at the point that I was going to commit suicide or do bodily harm to anybody? No, because I'm a stronger man than that. But there's a lot that leaks out that you can't handle it by yourself. You got to have somebody else help you with it. And that was what happened. Now, a lot of guys dealt with PTSD totally differently. We didn't even know what the hell PTSD was in 1973 when we come home. All we knew were guys were doing some different things or reacting things. Sudden movement was startling. One guy, Paul Galani, will never be in a room with the door closed. The door's got to be open. It's got to have a handle on the inside that he can open that door because he's been locked in solitary confinement for so long that he cannot be in that room unless he's got a way out of it. And when he sits with his back to the wall so he can always know exactly what's in there, what's around.
There's several
Yes.
several questions I would love to ask you, but I'll try to limit it to
Nope.
this one.
Okay, you can ask whatever you want, unless you're just running out of time.
That's the problem.
Okay.
What would you want today's generation or future generations to learn from your experience?
Well, a couple of things, and I talk about this quite a bit. The thing I think most important, whether it is somebody that's going into the ROTC program, or whether it's your basic freshman walking in the door, you need to set goals and make those goals achievable, but always increasing. You need to be very positive. You need to be very professional. The day of smoking dope and sitting back and letting the world go by doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. You need to be prepared to be a full-up participant in this society from day one. I ask you to think about how can you best serve this nation. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the military, because there's not everybody's cut out to be in the military. But if you're going to be a teacher, I want you to be the best grade school teacher you can be. If you're a football player, I want you to be the best. 110%. Always working, striving to be your best. You know what your goals are. You know what you're trying to attain, and you're always striving to get there. Will it be hard? Yeah. You know it. It's not a piece of cake. Life. It's not a box of chocolates there.
Right.
So there's going to be struggles. But what you need to do is to develop the skills to handle those hurdles, handle those down times, those difficult times. And rather than dwell on them being bad, how can I make that better? What can I accomplish out of learning from what I've just done? Because, again, my story will tell you that you had to be ready to bounce back. And you got to bounce back every time. Yes, there'll be times that you'll be in the dumps. We all are. But stand back up. Be proud to be American. And I'm afraid that our society is turning to a society of give me, where almost 51% of this great nation of ours is now in the what can you, the government, provide me? I don't want to work for it. I don't want to do anything for it. I just want you to give it to me. And we have all kinds of programs that allow that to happen. And what it does is it brings down the overall stature of this great nation of ours to a lower level, especially when 51%, and I'm not pulling that number out of my backside. It's tough then to maintain the high standards because we're being drugged down. We want you to stand up. We want you, the person on the take, to go, hey, I can do something. You give me the tools, you give me the money, and I will use that to better myself so that I can grow up to be stronger, so I can be an active member of this society. I want to be a doer. I want to be a person of importance rather than a taker, a receiver, a do-nothing person. And, you know, when I talk to my college kids and the kids that have graduated and on to pilot training, I don't worry about that 51% level. I'm worried about picking them up to even higher standards, making them meet those standards, always striving to be the best you can be, no matter what the deal is. But here at school, we have folks that are waffling between what I really want to do. Can I help? Can I make a difference? And yes, they can, because they need to get down in there where the problem is and find a way to solve it. They're the brightest minds in the world out there. These freshmen standing out here in this library this morning going, okay, I'm at Stillwater now. Where do I go? What's my... You know, they're just little ducklings, and they kind of follow whoever's leading them to whatever class it happens to be. And you're going to see it when you go to your class today, that they're going to all be little ducklings with eyes going, what can I do? And we need to give them a vector. We need to give them a reason. We need to give them the insight. We need to build within them the desire, the passion to be all they can be, to bring others with them, so that we can get this nation back up to being the greatest nation on earth. And it still is, but it's declined drastically in the years.
It seems that you have some very profound thoughts on the subject at hand. Before I ask my final question, is there anything throughout this interview that you wanted to address that perhaps I haven't asked or hasn't come up yet?
Oh, Jason, you know, I could talk for hours.
Yeah.
When I'm asked to do an hour class, you know, it's really a 55-minute class, and it's usually an hour and a half class when I get through. And I don't hit everything. But I try to pick out the high points. And I think we've done that. I mean, you've seen passion, desire, you've seen aches and pains, you've seen sorrow, you've seen a compassionate person, but you've also seen a fighter, a hero, really. I mean, and not that I'm a hero. I've got a chest full of medals and Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame inductee and everything. But it's the type of guy that we, when I say we, your American fighting man, are. And when it comes time for veterans to come back out into the society, if I'm a business guy and I have Joe Bagrag Van Dest out of college trying to get a job, or I have a veteran that has served his country, I'll take the veteran. And why do I do that? Because he has proven his worth to this society. He has got up every morning, went to work, done his job, come back, and made this a better place to live. He knows the importance of duty to honor our country. He knows what service is. He knows how to command or lead and follow. He knows those principles, which makes a very excellent workforce.
Absolutely. Well, I think you just hit my final question, which was how does society help veterans transition back home?
And we have a program here on campus, and all of them do. I think it's the VEEP, Veterans Entrepreneurial Program, where it reintegrates veterans into certain fields and things that they're interested in. It helps to get a little bit more education. But that veteran is the hardest working guy, and he'll do it. And he'll do an outstanding job. He's not going to be late for work. And he's not going to call in with the, I got a toothache today, or, woe be me. He's going to stand up and be there to work for you. And so we really need to stress that. And as veterans come in, we need to respect them and treat them for the heroes that they are, for the sacrifices that they have made, for they've truly been tremendous.
Absolutely. Well, as someone who's grown up in a peaceful society and benefited from all of the advantages of growing up in a democracy, I'd like to thank you for your service to your country.
That's just a given.
Absolutely.
That's what I do.
And I'd also like to thank you for sharing your story with us today. As a historian, I feel that these are important to our history.
Well, you know, the thing I find, Jason, and it's the hardest thing, is we've been in it here for 2 hours. A little over 2 hours, I guess, is pare that down. You know, when I do news briefs and things, you take all this and then turn it into a 15-second video or a 30-second video, you go, oh my God, how the hell are you ever going to do it? You know, let's see, Andy Wallace at O State TV. I've worked with him quite a bit, doing PSA spots on O State TV about duty, honor our country, about scabbard and blades, about giving back to your society and things. But you know, it's just something that we do. And these guys that are going to be over here today, these war heroes, are giving back because what we received here at this campus, and then through the military, and then we had another job after that. So, and now we're triple retired, being on Social Security. I mean, we're old farts. Okay. But, you know, we understand, and we have the ability and the time to give back. And, you know, it doesn't take but just a telephone call to say, hey, Schwertfeger, can you do this? And if I'm available, I'll be here. Mike Sloniker, 67 grad, Army, just like me. We're in the same tracks. Both went to Vietnam. He's on the ground, I'm in the air. We both come back, we both went back and did it again. He had a secondary career with Lockheed Martin. I had a secondary career flying for American Airlines. And now we're both retired. And we're doing what? We're giving back because this is where it all came from. This is the seed that produced this giant mechanism. From a mustard seed, the little seed of all, to the biggest tree. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.